evening, everybody. This is Steve over at That's Comical. Welcome back to another video. And of course, if you're watching on a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I'm very excited because of the fact that we almost got everybody here for a brand new episode of Must Be Read. And this is also a specific book that we had been anticipating and contemplating about actually doing a video for, simply because of the fact that I don't think it's a mystery. I think we can all agree, including April's cat over there, that this was definitely a book that is worth reading. And if you ever have the opportunity, you really should be reading it. And tonight we're going to be discussing Jeff Lemire's 5-issue miniseries from 2021 until 2022, Mazebook. So, of course, before we get into the book itself, I, of course, want to welcome everybody, my esteemed That's Comical colleagues. I've got Andy. How you doing, my friend?
If my mute button wants to work, I'd be even better. But hi, I'm doing good.
Good. And we've got April. How you doing?
Hi.
And big surprise, we did not know at the very last minute. Cammy just wanted to jump in. Cammy, I got to be honest, I didn't even know you had the book, but it's great to have you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you guys about this one. This one got me in all the feels for different reasons, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I guess where I really want to begin in regards to Mazebook, because Jeff Lemire is a name that you have all probably heard a lot on this channel lately, because Andy and myself have been on such a high when it comes to his work, and Jeff Lemire himself is definitely one of the hottest writers right now. And for me personally, I think that Mazebook was the spark that really got Jeff Lemire going in the last 2 years, because ever since Mazebook came out, I have been picking up almost every single one of his new releases, whether it was his 6-issue miniseries of Primordial, his phenomenal 3 issues of Robin and Batman, and just last week, his brand new series over at Image Comics, Phantom Road, began. And I read the first issue and I was like, oh my goodness, that is amazing. So I guess before we officially go into this book, I know, Andy, but you're welcome to talk about it again. You read Jeff Lemire's work before you tackled Mazebook. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's true. And I don't think we went into deep detail on Mazebook in particular when we were talking about his work more broadly, particularly because we knew we'd be wanting to do this at some point. But yeah, at a high level, I've become a big fan. He's, like you said, Steve, very hot right now. So I'm excited to see what more starts to come. But yeah, so I a lot of what I have to say about him is on another video, so I will keep it brief like that.
Right. And Cammy, you're very much new to comic books. Is this the first piece of Jeff Lemire's work that you ever read before? And was this a name that you were even familiar with when you were starting down into your various rabbit holes, as you like to call them?
Of course, having watched a lot of the videos on our own channel, conversations that you've had with others, I was familiar with the name. I have checked out another one of his books in the past, but for some reason, I guess I skipped over it. So I do believe this is my first experience with Jeff Lemire, and I can't say I was disappointed. So yeah, I'm a newbie to Lemire.
Yeah. April, how about yourself?
No, I'm new as well. This is the first of his that I've picked up. I'm sure I've heard his name several times before, but me and names, they never really register.
Yeah, sounds like my mom. She can't even read the first Harry Potter book because of the fact that she just can't get all the names of the characters. But so it's not an uncommon problem. So don't worry about that. Jeff Lemire for me was a name that I had heard many times, and I am not even sure if I read anything of his prior, because when I got back into comic books back in 2019, it was so funny when I went back to some of the old books that I was reading, and I said to myself, "Wow, I didn't even know that so and so wrote this, or so and so was the artist on this." Blah blah blah. So when I first read Mazebook, I would definitely say that that is my first official time that I read his work and knew that I was reading his work. What makes this specific book very special to me is not only did he write this 5-issue miniseries, he also was the artist. And one of the things that I really wanted to know was I really wanted to hear April's thoughts on the artwork, as she really is the true artist in the room out of the four of us. So, April, I really want to know what your thoughts are in regards to the artwork.
I have to say, at first I wasn't sure how I'd feel about this because it's such a sketchy style and it's so loose. But the way he does it and the story that's being told in parallel with all of the color choices he makes, I mean, it's actually what moves the story a lot further for me than the dialogue itself. Because he does this cool play of certain pops of color start to signify certain things. And as the story goes on and as it's being told, you start out in these like pretty drab colors, but in certain scenes you get almost like full color, but still a little muted. And because of the part of the story that it's telling with those colors, you really start to feel some of the emotions because of that.
I'm also really curious because when I look at it, to me, I don't know if I'm actually using the right terminology, but for me, it has a very watercolors effect, if that actually is, if I'm using the right terms.
Yeah, no, there's a translucency to it. So, I mean, it's probably somewhere between probably markers and watercolor, if I'm honest, but I mean, without actually knowing the man and seeing his process. But yeah, it's got that watercolor washed out kind of feel.
Yeah, I really need to do some research because outside of Gideon Falls, I know that another one of his most popular series was Sweet Tooth, which actually became a streaming series. I think he was the artist on Sweet Tooth as well, because I looked at some of the pages and they look very much like the Mazebook. I also believe that I know he's got another series coming out in the summer called Fish Flies. I know that one of the books at Free Comic Book Day is going to be a tease to the book, so I think he's also drawing that one. But it's really funny because of the fact that most of the stuff that I read of his after I read Mazebook was him teaming up with Justin Wynn. I mean, I think Cammie, as well as Andy and myself, we are all reading Little Monsters at the moment, so we definitely know what Justin Wynn's artwork is. And Andy can go on for days about Robin and Batman and Wynn's artwork there, but I personally love Lemire's artwork as much as I love his writing style, because the way that I call his artistry is it's simple yet complex. It's the same thing that I say about the Bruce Timm DC animated universe. They look so simplistic, especially when Batman the Animated Series first came out, those very square and sharp corners on everything. Yet when the more you watch it, there's so much more intricacy and so many more little nuances that you never really picked up on until you really start watching and look very carefully. And that's what I get from Mazebook and the artwork. I mean, obviously the most important part of this is the story itself. I didn't know what to expect from that book when I first saw that it was coming. I would probably say outside of the artwork, it really was the name, because now I'm catching myself. The first piece of Jeff Lemire's work that I read was the fourth book in the Silver Coin series by Matt Walsh. That was the first time that I read his work. And then when I saw that it was so out there and so different, that was when I said, okay, I want to see what he does in terms of writing an entire story. And it is very deep. And yet, for some strange reason, there is such a fantasy tone to it. And as I said in prior videos, and we'll probably add that a little bit further, a little bit of a Jim Henson feel to it as well.
Before we get too far in talking about the story, though, while we're talking about the artwork, I don't know if any of you happen to read kind of the end of this where he's talking about creating the story and kind of how he was coming off of a slump. And he was saying that the most challenging part of this for him was the cover art for these different comics, because he was creating them and then he wasn't liking the end result. So he actually had an inspiration for the covers, And that kind of stems off of what April had just said in terms of the color. And Michael Cho is the one that he used as the inspiration for this because he enjoyed his color pops. And he says once he started kind of messing around with the color, that's when all of that opened up. And he just said it just became this, you know, artwork that he couldn't describe. It just worked. It made, you know, the series really what it became. Now, of course, the artwork on the inside is very different. You have the subtle stream of the red string and everything like that. That was all part of the process. But it was really interesting to hear how something you would think would already be planned out was the most difficult part of this. And the covers are amazing.
Yeah, it's funny because that seems to be the case in a lot of different places. It's like everyone finds out that the most recognizable and probably one of the most simplest things is actually the hardest thing that the person has actually tried to conceive. It's very interesting when you think about that. So yeah, the story is definitely something. I mean, when I opened that book, I did not know what I was going to expect. I really didn't. But all I can say is that with every issue, I just was so excited to read the next one because it also is a book you don't necessarily have to read. There's dialogue in it, but I love the fact, and I know that April has said this a couple of times, this is also one of those books that even though there are word bubbles in it, there's also a lot of show, don't tell.
And I would say about that point that, you know, it's great that he tackled both the writing and the art of this one because it very much feels to me like a Jeff Lemire story, but one that since it's being told so primarily through the art, one that it might have been strange for him. Like I obviously he's got this deep relationship with Wynn and they do the stuff together quite a bit. But there's something very intimate about how the art is handled in this one and the story coming across through it that makes you kind of understand why a writer would feel like they wanted that level of control over it. Even though, as we've talked about before on this channel, in American comics, it's pretty rare. That's not something that happens all that often. And it's interesting as well because you can see it when reading the story because the story is so visual and the way it's told is so visual that, you know, it's interesting. Cami, I did not read that piece that you mentioned, but that's really great to hear because the idea feels so birth told that I would not have expected that there would have been any difficulty around any visual piece for it because it seems like that was his entire idea. But fascinating to hear. So I'm glad to have that background.
So what about the story for the rest of you? Did you all expect this to be what it was? And because one of the few things that I like about this book is it's definitely outside of the superhero. So it's definitely something that anyone that wants to read a good story can enjoy. But also there's a lot of melancholy throughout the story because I did not anticipate this story being about a man who has been mourning the death of his daughter, and yet he has not been able to move on from that horrible moment. And it caused him to really see his life get upended. You get to see the kind of life that he had before the death of his daughter, and the fact that he is getting connections, strange, odd, paranormal-like connections to his daughter, and she's basically telling him, you need to find me.
I think for me, I kind of expected the story to go into much darker places, but I'm so glad that it didn't because for me, that worked out a lot better. And again, kind of going back to the explanation of the author's take on writing this story, he did fully intend for this to be a lot darker and a lot more violent. But he himself said that wasn't this story. And so he kind of made it a more slice of life. And I didn't really understand that term and even as a genre until I read this. And I kind of now understand what that means, because you're not getting the full scope of who this guy is. You're not fully understanding who he was and where he came from and his whole life story. You're only getting the him now, the broken pieces of him. And as a reader, you really want to know, okay, who is this Wendy? And, you know, why can't he remember her face? But there is some really impactful statements that are made at the very beginning of this series, where he says repetition is kind of like death in and of itself. And those are the types of things as a reader that really just pack a punch for me. And when he's talking about, you know, why can I remember her sweater, but I can't remember her face? And that also really hit me in the feels, because think about how often as people we can remember the things about those that we love that they themselves enjoyed, whether that be hobbies or the clothing that they wear, the perfume perhaps that they wore. But when it comes down to it and the person passes, all of those things meant nothing. And then we try to grab onto all the memories that we can, and then we kind of beat ourselves up because it's the important things that we overlooked. And that's what was so powerful for me in the writing style, is that he didn't have, you know, as Andy had put, he didn't have a lot of dialogue. This was much more visually driven, but when he did have dialogue, it was so intense and just so meaningful. And I very much appreciated just kind of seeing someone as broken as he was, but he forced himself to kind of push through this. Like, what is the why is Wendy trying to reach me? What is the point here? And when we got to the monster part, I got really excited again, because I'm like, oh, this is going to be dark. But again, I'm so grateful that there was just images, because that was so not what the story was about, you know. And the fact that he left this as a connection between a father and a daughter, and how important she was to him, was just so beautiful.
Yeah, you hit a lot of good points there, Cami. I think what also I found very interesting was the fact that the maze concept has so many levels and layers to it, because number one, it's another connection that he has to Wendy. And it's also this quest that he is sent on to try and find her. But it's also very interesting because his entirety of his life is very much like a maze, because he's going in so many different directions, and there are points in time where he is actually creating his own dead ends and his own stopping points when he has to start again, because he's given a lot of opportunities to finally break free of his grief, like the opportunity to do good things by tearing down old buildings in the construction sites to build new ones. Yet he still feels like, you know, there's significance to the past. The fact that he gets a connection to a certain degree from his neighbor who he's never spoken to before. And yet one of the first things that he does after he makes that connection with her is he goes to his ex-wife to ask for things from his daughter. So he is given so many opportunities to get better, and yet he's still trying to prevent himself from getting there because of the fact that he's losing this connection with his daughter. And because of the fact that he's basically seeing mazes everywhere. I mean, the scene where he goes to a tattoo parlor and asks the guy to put this maze on my chest. It reminded me some kind of like that Christopher Nolan movie Memento, just to like put things on your body so you don't forget them. It was so bizarre with some of the twists and turns they went in. And yet for some strange reason, there was still a sympathetic side to all of it, a wholesome side to all of it, if you will. I mean, that's just what I was getting, at least from the first few issues, until we got that truly, purely fantasy moment.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the fact that this is all centered around maze books, mazes, labyrinths, whatever you want to call it, because there's a lot in the mythology of a labyrinth, of a maze, and also there's a lot of theology in them as well, because you have these legends and these journeys centered around trying to find something in a labyrinth, but you also have this whole theology of finding yourself in a labyrinth, walking those paths, just going through and just kind of just searching oneself rather than being distracted by everything else going around. And I like how that plays in here, because it starts out in that like Minotaur type of labyrinth. Like, I'm on a quest, I'm on a journey, I need to find her, there's something deeper going on. But then it kind of shifts into this like, okay, I think I'm looking at this wrong. I think there's something a little different going on here. And I need to start focusing more on how I am interacting with all of this rather than trying to interact with it, if that makes sense.
No, it does, because there's so many points in time where he thinks he's going in the right direction and he's just finding more questions than he is answers, until that point where he's saying, wait a second, and then he like figures it all out. And then the dog comes into play. That was definitely, I still remember when I first read that book, and then I see the dog and the word bubble that comes out. That was where the Jim Henson vibe hit me. Because I'm like, if Jim Henson wrote this, that is totally what he would say if one of the characters was a talking dog.
No, it's something I want to just mention that's, I mean, it's a broader point, but it goes off of what April was saying. So now's as good a time as any to talk about it. So, I mean, the maze being, you know, a very concrete metaphor for his grief and working through it. I think it's important to think about it in terms of, you know, this is not a maze where you're seeking an exit to get through. This is a maze where you're seeking something to be found within at the final point, and feeling that he is being called to by his daughter from the center of the maze and getting closer to her by going, I hesitate to use the word through, but it's the best one I have, into the maze is better for it. In that he gets closer to her as he gets deeper into his grief. And what does he find there? He finds a monster there. And you know, to go back to the idea of like the darkness of it, you know, this is a very, it's a bleak story up until it is hopeful. It doesn't need violence for that. It doesn't need any of those kinds of over-the-top themes, because it accomplishes that through the grief. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I think, you know, when we start talking about the aha and the way to proceed for it, and when it starts to make sense to him, I think it keys in directly to his sense of grief at the time. And the closer he gets to his daughter, the more he's, like Cami was talking about, the motif of seeing her face and like getting more attuned and like picking up the pieces to getting into it. He gets closer to the center of the maze, but gets closer to his grief. And is that a way to deal with it? You know, yes and no. I think the story has a hopeful, a strong hopeful theme, at least at the end of the day. But it's a story about processing that grief. As I said, it's a broader point. It's but as good a time as any to make it.
I will say though, when he got the tattoo on his arm, I was kind of disappointed he didn't do it in red ink. I was really hoping that he would ink it in red just for the symbolic, you know, nature of the string that he was chasing. But in a way it kind of made sense, because it was the labyrinth, or the maze rather, not so much the string. But I just thought that would tie the two in very well. I don't know, I'm weird like that. I pay attention to strange details in books.
So the dog. Let's talk about that dog, because one of the few things that sort of made me happy when the dog came into play was two reasons, now that I've read the book 2 times. The first thing I liked is the fact that, you know, not that many people like tropes, specific tropes and cliches and stuff like that, but one of the few things that I have known throughout my entire life as a pop culture junkie is you cannot go through a maze without a companion. You need to have that voice that's be outside of his daughter who is asking him to find him. You also need that guiding light to show you the way. And the dog brings us out of that darkness a little bit and gives us that lightheartedness that I think by this time we're craving, because we've all been brought to this guy's really dark places in his mind. And we also see that not just in his mind, but in the real world based on how he has been interacting with the people around him. And that was one of the few things that I was very impressed by with the book. The fact that Jeff Lemire was willing to go into those very dark directions for someone that has been dealing with loss. The fact that he shuns people away, the fact that when he does interact with people, it's very full of really rough emotions. He has rough edges. He's not the kindest person. He also shows an extreme lack of strength and confidence, like especially when his neighbor clearly thinks good things all about him, but he just doesn't want to let her in because he knows he's in a bad place. So to a certain degree, the dog symbolizes your opportunity where you can go in the next stage of your life. This is the link that you need. Once you've found your prize, then you know what your next mission is going to be.
I think the dog was very poignant though, because he symbolized a lot. Vern did so many things for this story. He was the narrator, as you say, through this maze, which was very important for Will. But he obviously belonged to Lisa, which was a connection again to Will. And then the beauty of Vern for me was when he started to recollect things about Wendy, and he remembered that Wendy wanted a dog and he never got a dog for her. And that for him was a moment of clarity and sadness all in the same, because again, when I'm going back to the beginning, when I was saying about how we remember the little details, there are things that we don't do. There are things that we say no to. And at the time, it may or may not make sense. But those are the things we end up regretting in the end because we said no, because we didn't give it a chance. And so for him, to already be in a moment of grief and then to be presented with this dog, and who doesn't love a Labrador? I mean, they are the symbolism of helping people through grief, because dogs are the most pure companions when it comes to dealing with sadness. I love cats, April, though, don't get me wrong, I am a cat lady and I will admit that. That said, though, it's rare, it's much more rare to get a cat that gives you the affection when you need it. But Vern was just perfection. He came in at all the right moments. And I do love that, again, it's all about those perfect little moments of narration. When Will is saying, I should really tell Lisa what you're really like. And he's like, what is that supposed to mean? He's like, you're sort of an asshole. And he's like, well, at least I'm not a cat.
Yeah.
It's just like, that is so perfect. I love you, Vern. You just want to pull him through the story and just bring him home with you. But I think that a character like him in the shape of a dog is so much more important and prolific than it would have been if it was a human narrator, because he just symbolizes so much for so many of the characters in different ways, and that is an amazing way to tie everyone together.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely brought the innocence back into the grief that we were all experienced as we were going through this story, and it was the start of hope when he entered the story for the first time, and just to see how even if you have that glimmer, sometimes you fight against it, because we had that moment of, yes, we have the logic going on, but at the same time, grief is still driving. And eventually it comes back to, okay, we've got this innocence, we've got this loyalty, we've got this friendship that just ended the story very, very beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
No. All I had to say is actually very very similar to that, April. I think that there's something about there's just an inherent hopefulness, I think, to I mean there's a reason there's the phrase like man's best friend, right? So like there's an inherent hopefulness there, and then obviously the connection to his daughter who had wanted a dog, and like it brings an element of connectedness, and also one that people immediately find warm by and large, which I think is helpful. So if you know there needed to be a Virgil to Will's Dante, it makes sense in a story like this for it to be a warm figure that he would find comfort in.
Right. So then, of course, we get to the climax of the story, and once again, it takes on a clear trope that we always get with the maze. We come into contact with the Minotaur of the maze, and I hope that I'm right about this, because when I analyzed this, the Minotaur is not a creature at all. The Minotaur symbolizes Will's fear of letting go. That's what I think it was, because he knows that in order to get back to where he needs to be happy, to be successful, to find the right people in his life, he has to let Wendy go. He knows that she is not there anymore, but just because she is not your main focus after she's gone on, you're always going to remember her. And that's what I think was the issue with Will, because Will was starting to forget her face. He was starting to realize, you know, she's gone now, and if I keep moving on, I may never remember my daughter. So the Minotaur is that fear, and he needs to conquer that fear, because if he doesn't let her rest in peace, he is never going to find his own peace. And that's what I felt the Minotaur symbolized in this book.
Felt a connection to the Minotaur in a way. Again, this kind of streams back from dialogue when Will is referencing telling Wendy that monsters didn't exist. You know, that when he's explaining that to her, and explaining that I don't know exactly how it's worded. I don't know if he said they didn't exist or that they would go away as she got older, I think is how he more so words it. But she didn't have the opportunity, obviously, to grow up, so the monsters didn't go away. So to me, it was a symbol of something that was lingering, something dark that was lingering, but it also connected them because it was something that they talked about. And so in that, again, as he's following the red string, which is attached to the sweater that he thinks is his connection to Wendy, as he's following it down the dark subway tunnel that Vern can't follow him, he's like, no, don't go, I can't follow you down there. That was when Will had to face his monsters, and Will had to make that you know, understanding, it's now or never. I've got to face the beast. I don't think he so much knew that he was going to find the monster down there, but when he did, it was easily battled. It wasn't like something he had to fight through. It was just he had to get to the on the other side of that Minotaur to get to Wendy. And it was through that Wendy kind of said, hey, Dad, you know, you have to move on from this. You have to let go. You have to let me go. And I think in a way, us as the readers at that point let Wendy go, because in a way I think we were hopeful that he was going to get through this maze and he was going to find her and somehow bring her home. And I think it's also important while we're talking about those alternate realities that this book was highly influenced by the writing style of Haruki Murakami. And for that, Murakami also does those kind of alternate realities where you're kind of, you know, going between two worlds, so to speak, in his writing. And so in that, in a way, if you're familiar with his writing, even if you're not, if you're just familiar with reading the tropes of alternate realities, you know, at that moment that the main character has to make a decision. I either stay in this world with this reality and this becomes my new norm. And in a way, he almost wanted to do that for a minute. No, I want to stay here with you. This is what I was meant to do. I was meant to be your father. I don't want to go back there. But Wendy was encouraging him, you will always be my father, but you need to live. I need to do so much more than just me. And when she said it, I think that allowed him to be able to go ahead and let go, because, we didn't even touch on the trauma that he kind of had carried with him through life because of his ex-wife. She seemed to be a very harsh person. She seemed to be very judgmental. It doesn't seem like they ever talked through the death of their daughter. They just kind of grew apart and divorced, and she moved on. And even when he's coming to her just for simple articles of their daughter so he can connect with her, just the cold shoulder that she gives him, how can I get rid of you very quickly? You can just see him continue to crumble inside. So that Minotaur, for me, it was so much more of a connector piece to all of these characters and all of the darkness that did ensue within this story. But the beauty was Wendy, because Wendy, although she didn't grow up to see that monsters eventually didn't exist, she conquered the monster that was controlling her father. And that was the best gift she could have given him, allowing him to hopefully move on with Lisa, because I think that's what we all kind of hoped in the end.
Yeah, I read The Minotaur. It was shaped by his experience with his daughter, but it was a manifestation of his grief, because it was a monster that he always had hidden inside of himself. He didn't actually want to come face to face with it, but it was also the piece that was slowly deteriorating his memory of his daughter. Because you have that one scene where he's remembering talking about monsters with his daughter, and the Minotaur shows up. And his first instinct is, hey, you can't be in here. You can't be here right now because this is my precious memory. And that's when I kind of shifted into, okay, the Minotaur is his grief. And his grief is slowly destroying him. And that's this journey he's trying to work his way through. And he can either choose to stay and deal with this Minotaur, or he can just continue to spiral around in this circle, in this maze, and never really finding any endpoint.
I agree completely. And I think that it's the idea of, with the maze being grief and the Minotaur being a strong manifestation of that, there is the idea that he needed to get to the center of it to find some kind of healing. I was sitting here while you were talking, thinking I was about to be profound, and then realizing I was quoting WandaVision, which is, what is grief if not love persevering? Like, damn it, that is actually profound though. But that's also what's happening here, right? And it's about reframing his relationship with grief, because he sees his daughter in his grief, and he doesn't know who he is without the grief, because it's his connection to his daughter. And when he starts to forget her face, when he starts to feel like he's at risk of moving on, he's equated his grief as his love so closely that he needs to defeat the monster of grief in the same kind of self-exploratory way, where he can encounter it and realize that the love part of it can exist. WandaVision. Yeah, that's where that was from.
Anyway. The only thing is that Will did not create his own. Well, technically, did he not create his own reality when it comes to all of this? He sort of did to a certain degree. He basically, oh, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, there is an argument to be said that maybe this isn't an alternate reality, but an inner reality. And that maybe all of this didn't take place physically, but it did, but it didn't. There's like this weird shift that happens, and maybe it was built up in his head more than it was built up around him.
Yeah.
No, and that's a perfect point, April, because if we look at the dreams, the reference to dreams, you're absolutely right. This was definitely a mind reality. And just referencing Murakami's work that I just meant, you toggle between realities, but in this particular case, you're 100% correct. This was all in his mind, and when he fell asleep, it allowed him to make those connections. So that's very important. I aspire to have half April's brain and half Andy's brain in my next life, and I will be solid. I'll be golden. I really like how you guys analyze things.
So then we get the ending, and one of the few things that I will definitely say is, in a world where we get nothing but continuations and sequels, and nobody knows how to, dare I say, let sleeping dogs lie, all I can say is that after reading issue number 5, I just basically said to myself, I feel satisfied. This could not have ended in a better way possible, and I hope that nobody forces Jeff Lemire to write more of this, because that's one of the few things that I think makes Jeff Lemire the strongest writer in comics today, because he is a writer that knows how to do a specific thing that so many comic book writers today cannot seem to get right. He sticks the landing. He gets a perfect 10. Every single time he concludes a mini or a maxi series that he writes, he gives you that feeling of satisfaction. Like, you basically put that book down and you say, I'm good. This is great. I don't need more. You gave me everything that I needed on your first attempt. Bravo.
And I don't want to talk too much about his other work because we've done it at length, but I think it's an important thing to note that I agree with you completely, Steve. But it's also it's great that he was able to write this book, because this is such a, I don't want to call it niche, because I think this is they're universal themes. But does it look on the surface like a commercially successful piece? A story about a middle-aged guy suffering from trauma and grief, a mini series with little dialogue. How do you get someone to publish that? You get it by being at the top of your field. And I think this is an example of one of those things. There was a degree of trust there, so he was able to execute on the vision he had without a lot of interference. And the reason I reference, I'm not going to talk about a lot of other works, is that I do want to make a quick nod again to Robin and Batman, which is one of the greatest things I've read in recent memory, also written by Lemire. And it's miniseries, and again, it's that trust. It's that he was trusted this time with characters that were not his own, but to tell a story, and given the freedom to do it in 3 issues, in and out, tell the story he wants to tell, and be done. I don't think we're looking at Mazebook 2, She's Back anytime soon. And that's a great thing, right? So I'm very pleased with this work. And I think you're exactly right, Steve. I don't think there's more to come. There's more to come from Jeff Lemire, but there's not more to come from this universe. And that's wonderful.
Well, before everyone else speaks, I just do want to say something. Even though Robin and Batman is fantastic on its own, I am still waiting for Robin and Batman 2 Electric Boogaloo. But that's just me.
See, that one I'd read.
No, I think it's more about that I just love how Jeff Lemire writes his own original stories. And now that he's signed that massive contract with Image Comics, he's going in so many different directions. And like I said, everything that I have read that has come out of the Image Comics label, I mean, and this is not even an Image book, this is a Dark Horse book, which makes me also even more impressed, which is why I love the indie comic world so much. But seeing that he does so well with his original creations, but also if he's given the right reins and he's given the opportunity to do everything that he needs to do to make a successful comic with characters that are not his, you just want to see him do that more often, because I know that he doesn't get much credit for that short run that he had on the Green Arrow title. Not that many people talk about his very brief run on Constantine. Not many people even think about him, you were the only reason why I remembered it. And I actually want to say I now officially have Thanos issues 1 through 12 because I'd like to read that. But Donny Cates stole his thunder with issues 13 through 18. So you didn't really get much of an appreciation for his work based on characters that we already knew who are already established. But seeing that he is at the top of his game now and what he's done with Robin and Batman, what he's doing with Swamp Thing right now, Swamp Thing Green Hell, 2 books down, 1 book to go. I'm loving it. I want to see DC and Marvel give him opportunities. You know what I would love? In the spirit of Robin and Batman, I would love to see a short miniseries of John Kent and his dad, Superman. I think that he could do wonders with those 2 characters, especially if he's allowed to create the child version of John Kent and not the adult version of John Kent. But that's what I want. It's not that I want another Robin and Batman. I want him to be given more opportunities to use familiar characters in his own way of storytelling so more people will hear his name and want to read it. I mean, I still haven't read Gideon Falls, but I know you picked up some of it, Andy. I don't know if you've read it yet.
I haven't finished it. I was actually going to say I can see it in this room I'm in. It's like the only copy of it. Weirdly, I don't have Mazebook in my hands right now. I usually grab whatever we're talking about when I do.
Don't worry, I don't
The
either.
main thing is now I'm just going to be mad every day that there isn't a Jeff Lemire, John Kent story. As soon as you said that, oh man, that sounds good. But I digress. So, you know. But,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
So good.
Well, I will say in conclusion, you know, if you've been looking for something good to read, Mazebook is definitely one of those reads. I don't really know if it's his best work because there's still so much of his work that I haven't read. And what's so interesting about me and Jeff Lemire is the minute something new comes out, I sort of forget about everything else that he's done because I'm just so enveloped in the current story that he's currently giving me. And like, Cammie, I know you're a horror fan. Phantom Road, another attempt of Jeff Lemire's with Show Don't Tell. It's interesting. It's an interesting starting point. I'm curious to see where it's going to go. But then I'm reminded of all of those great pieces that he's already done. And not only that, I'm just excited to find out when's the next project that he's coming out with because I want to read more. That's the one thing. Jeff Lemire is one of those writers right now that if you have been intimidated by comics, if you're looking for something that is outside the superhero genre, I think that Jeff Lemire is one of the best people to look for because his strong suits are definitely in the horror / dark fantasy. And that's what I feel is his targeted market. So I don't really know what Fish Flies is about. I also found out that he did a secret project with a couple of other well-known names, and it's coming out in September. It's a trade called Cosmic Detective. It's basically, the plot line is, when a god is killed, who solves the crime? Like, that sounds pretty cool. So I would check that out. But that's what I love so much about him, because he just gives us stories that you don't normally get in comics. These are things that you would get in areas like manga or science fiction novels, so to speak. And I think with all of these people saying that the comic book industry's biggest fault is because they're trying to be too much like anime, I think you're not reading the right stories. And Jeff Lemire is a perfect example of a non-superhero, broken mold piece of work.
That kind of mentality, and I think that kind of mentality, though, streams from people who don't read comics regularly, because I think that a good mass amount of people want an alternate choice from the superhero genre. You know, don't get me wrong, everyone in the room, we all love our superheroes for various reasons, and we'll talk about them till we're blue in the face. But I think that does speak volumes for all these independent comic companies that are becoming kind of overnight sensations because they're taking a chance on stories such as this, and it's really resonating with readers because we're getting these stories that we're not accustomed to reading in comic books, and it's really refreshing. It's a nice change of pace. If you're a normal book novel reader, you can kind of just jump into one of these stories, and it's not a huge investment monetarily or time wise, and you walk away feeling very satisfied.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you're right. Superhero stories are great, but it's just that, and we said this before, I think a lot of us are superheroed out just because of the fact that superheroes have become pretty much taken by Hollywood, and we're given them and they're given to us in movies and in television shows, in video games right now. So I just feel at some point in time, it's not that you don't want to keep them in your heart, you just need a breath of fresh air. And I think that us being big fans of comics and manga, we're not necessarily the people with the ultimate knowledge, but what our goal here, I think we can all agree on that, is we are pretty much your entry point. We want to give you the right stories that are digestible, things that are definitely going to stick with you, and also, more importantly, let you know what are great jumping on points and also finding out where your niche is. That's what I think we are here for as YouTubers and fans of these two specific mediums. So I just had one more question. Cami, when did you read Mazebook? Because I didn't even know that you were reading it. I have to know.
So I cannot remember the name of the author that you and I read. I want to say it was probably more than a year ago. Remember that series in the library?
Oh, that's W. Maxwell Prince.
So when you mentioned Lemire, for some reason, I thought that was this author. And so I was like, oh, I like that author. Let me jump right in. So I actually read this a few months ago. And then when you guys said that you were going to reschedule the conversation, I reread it just a few weeks ago. So I've read this twice now and I love it just the same. But yeah, that's kind of why I jumped into it, because I thought I was familiar with the author, only to find out this was totally not that author. But that's okay, because that's how you find new authors to love.
Well, I would definitely tell you, Cami, that I know who the type of person that you are, and I know that you love to jump down to rabbit holes. So I'm really hoping.
Rabbit holes.
I just really am. You see, that's another thing I'm really surprised about. I need to call you out on something here. Did you not, especially in the scene where Will discovers the dog for the first time, did you not? I'm surprised you did not reference anything that could be connected to Lewis Carroll, because that was a very Alice in Wonderland moment.
No, I don't feel that I made any Alice connections with this. Because I guess when I go into Alice archetypes or similarities, it's a lot more whimsical and odd, if that makes any sense. And so for this being so driven to what I would compare to like modern day living, because Will was, he's kind of a boring inspector guy, I never really jumped in. And even when he kind of went into dreamland, I never really got those feelings, because there wasn't a huge selection of alternate characters. It just seemed to be very ABC, very cookie cutter. So no, I didn't. And even when you were talking about Vern kind of giving you Jim Henson vibes, I still didn't even get that. I just appreciated the fact that Vern was a dog and not a human, because who doesn't love dogs?
Well, I think we're going to be having many more Jim Henson moments when we all come back together at the end of the month, and we're all going to be analyzing and talking about and probably gushing over Scotty Young's twig. So if you want to talk about a real Jim Henson vibe, that's where we're going to go. But anyway, everybody, that's going to wrap up another episode of Must Be Read. I'm really glad that all four of us got together to talk about this. I'm hoping that all of you enjoyed, and I'm hoping that you will think about maybe checking out Mazebook and another couple of pieces that Jeff Lemire has done. So in the meantime, everybody, just don't forget to leave a comment and don't forget to leave a like in the box below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. I'm actually going to say in truth now, because I know that I've sort of been saying more content is coming and there hasn't really been much, but I promise you, you've gotten a decent amount of content for the past couple of weeks, everybody. We've got a lot of big projects in the works before the month of March is over. So in the meantime, everybody, thank you very much for watching. We'll all see you in the next one.